So my name is Etty Schwartz, and I am the Chabad Shlucha, the Chabad Rebbetzin at NSU College, Nova Southeastern University campus in South Florida, in Broward College in South Florida. And that is my main, I would say, well, that and raising, thank God, 5 kids is where the majority of my time and energy is spent. It's a big honor to be able to be a part of people's life journeys. And we actually just celebrated the wedding and the Shever Brachas of one of our couples this week, which was really special to be able to be, part of that journey with them. And that's something that I do daily, and a personal passion of mine is teaching Jewish women. I feel very strongly about being educated, about being educated specifically in what Torah actually says and what we can actually learn from our life. No matter how much I learn, I feel like I know nothing. But I know that many times I'll hear something, or I'll learn something, or I'll, even worse now with social media, I'll read like a tagline, right? And I'll come home like, what? Torah says what? Jewish women, what? And I'll be like infuriated about something that I hear. And every time my husband or my mentors, whoever I come speaking to, will take out the sources and we'll relearn everything in the source and inside, and with all of the nuances and all of the opinions. And time again, I'm blown away by what gift we have in Torah, in what I do feel like is the most sensical thing I know at this point. With the world being a little nuts, I feel like every time I learn something inside Torah, and not just a tagline, but really something in depth, I get something really true and really, really, nuanced. I think the nuance is where the truth lies. And it's very special. And so I feel very passionate about sharing whatever I can learn, and then, learning more. So that's where I feel like when I'm asked to teach, if I can, I do. Even though I always feel like maybe there's somebody better out there. There probably is somebody who knows more, but I feel like if I was asked, then that's kind of the opportunity that came my way. Then I need to try rise to the occasion if I can. So I'm going to try to rise to the occasion with you here today. I'm very honored to be back with you special women. And today we're going to cover Miriam. Now, let me just check. Hold on one second. I'm getting some messages. I don't think anyone needs to be added in. So somebody raised their hand. I'm not very good at this. So if at the Zoom thing. So if anybody needs something, you can also just stop me. So Susan, are you asking something? Yes. So you need to unmute.
Yes. Yeah. I wanted to know what was your recent Torah nuance that blew you away? I'm curious about that.
Oh boy. A recent Torah nuance that blew me away is going to hit politics, which I don't like to bring up.
Oh no, forget it. Forget it. No, don't worry about it then, because I'm
thinking of something else.
Yeah, I don't know anything about the politics going on. I don't watch the news because it used to upset me, and it's no. Okay, I retract that request.
I don't think you should retract it. I think that one of the things I love about being with Jewish people, Jewish women, is I think we have really respectful communication. We have, when we do Shabbat dinners, we're sitting with many college students from the age of 18 to almost 30, and which is a very interesting time in people's lives where they're very passionate and very heated. And it's something that we say time and time again, is it's really special to be able to sit in a room and have real conversations. Probably the only place ever that these people, including myself, can actually talk about different ideas and not hate each other after, So we don't bring politics up at Chabad, but the most recent thing I think is about abortion. But I'm not going to bring up politics. I'll just speak about it from a personal friend of mine. So I'm just going to share a personal story that I thought was fascinating. which is a sad story, but a true one. This was a couple years ago already, but a really good friend of mine, a close friend of mine, who's actually also a Chabad Shlucha, Rebbetzin, unfortunately at her 20-week checkup, found out that her baby did not have a brain.
Oh,
And there was no viable chance of life at all. And it was very painful, very, very difficult. And when she spoke to the people who were the experts in medicine, as well as the experts in Torah law for her at the time, the answer that she was, or she was basically given the answer that she is allowed to do whatever she needs to do for her own health, and her own health was not only physical but also includes mental health. And her medical team advised her to abort, and it was very painful. It was a very difficult and painful decision for a family that treasures and values every life and every baby to no end. And when that happened, I was in touch with her every step of the way. I spent a lot of time learning about it, and it was very interesting to me to see the deep sensitivity that was given to her every single step of the way. That it was very difficult. It was a very difficult thing, and I just thought that blew me away. And I hope to never be in that position, but it was a very powerful thing for me to watch. So I think to answer that question, that was something that, obviously I've discussed more and more and I've researched more and more over time. But I think in my 20s, I had very different opinions, but in my 30s, in my later 30s at this point, and I have many friends who have been through many different difficult challenges with various pregnancies, watching how valued life is in Torah and how nuanced it is, that's been blowing me away step by step. Yes. Yeah.
You're talking to me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I know I've read in the paper, I'm curious about what Chabad would think about this. I've read in the paper that some of these states are actually not even allowing the removal of an ectopic pregnancy. What does Chabad think about that? Because if it's not removed, the woman can die of hemorrhaging.
So I can't respond. What does Chabad think about that? And I have not followed the news step by step, but I don't know what the legalities are. But in general, we value the mother's life, and we would remove it. So yeah, that's the, anyways, I wish that I knew more to share more, but that was a true answer to a personal question.
That's right.
Amy, do you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, hi everyone. So there's quite a few, especially the last one, interesting articles giving the Torah perspective on this issue in the Jewish press. So anyone who wants to look at them, they could go to the jewishpress.com and put in the search abortion.
I have to say, I didn't read it, so I can't speak on that article, but I find it very difficult to learn much from any article or news report. I can tell you, as somebody who has been in the news, what you say and what they report is not at all the same, and it's kind of shocking.
Right.
Well, I mean, what they do in the article is it's obviously an opinion, but they're bringing in the various sources for the three opinions. Is it the fetus a human life, not a human life, or potential? So it's actually very interesting.
No, I'm sure it is interesting. I just find that, again, in my personal experience, every single situation is so nuanced. And I think that's actually part of the beauty of Torah, is that the truth is so true that it is true in every situation. In other words, there's a response and there's a way of going forward in every life situation for every challenge or for everything that comes up. It's not just, this is a rule and now you're stuck figuring something out. And I don't mean just about this topic, I mean about every topic. I feel like really, for example, one might say you cannot drive on Shabbos. One might say that statement, and I will tell you that's not true. That is not a true statement in every situation, because the same Shabbos also has, if there is something that we need to do to save a life, or if somebody is having a baby or whatever, there are times that we would drive on Shabbos. So just saying, to me personally, again, I find this to be the beauty of Torah, is that just making these blanket statements usually are actually missing the depth and the truth of what Torah is. And Torah is a living, breathing Torah, which means that it's living and breathing with us, with each and every one of us, in real life things that we're going to go through and that we're going to deal with. And I've personally had many times that it's come up, that things that I learned, and then I had to delve deeper into, and I learned that actually that's not, true in my case. And it's not that, I don't know, I'm trying to think of another example quickly, but it's not like, I had a baby on Shabbat. I had a C-section on Shabbos. And it was really interesting because, you're in the hospital, and I was in a very dangerous situation at the time. And it was also Shabbos. And I was trying my best to figure out, like, what do I do? But what was really interesting was that it wasn't like I was doing the secondary thing by, I wasn't really keeping Shabbos that day. I was really focusing on being alive, going through the process. And it wasn't, you're doing the secondary thing or the lesser thing. It was, what does God want from you in this moment? In this moment, you're doing exactly what Hashem wants from you, what God wants from you. Exactly. So the same way that maybe somebody else is keeping Shabbos by lighting candles in their house and making Kiddush, I was keeping Shabbos by turning on my lamp and leaving it on for Shabbos that night. And I wasn't doing it less than. I was doing, this is exactly how Hashem wants me to keep Shabbos in this moment. The same exactly as somebody else doing something else. And so I think that's very, very nuanced, and there's a lot to learn, and it's really, the learning never really ends. And because we go through so many different things, and life is evolving all the time, we have to keep learning. And there's a lot of questions to be asked all the time, and figuring out, I don't know, I feel like it's small things all the time. Like this past Shabbos, we had a box of matches that I had not moved before Shabbos. I didn't realize it was there. Well, I have, thank God, little ones. And so normally would we touch a box of matches once Shabbos has begun? Once Shabbat has begun? No, normally I wouldn't. But because I have little children, and Torah values safety. And by the way, I have had times where a kid lit a match, so I'm very careful about this. I moved the matches, but the same thing, and I put them away for safety, even after Shabbos had begun. But I did not do it the same way I would normally do it. I'm a righty with my right hand, regular. The same Torah says we do it with what's called a shinoi, with like a change, something that's a little bit different, so that your own brain doesn't get confused, right? Like, just pick it up regular, you could forget it's Shabbos. So I did move it. These are little things, but I feel like this is life. This is Torah's life. And it's not, now I'm keeping it, now I'm not. This is the Torah life. Anyway, this is super, we could bring about this all day, but I think I want to get into the topic of today, as we're learning the women of Tanach, because we learned so much nuance in everything we learn. And there's so much in the women of Tanach. And today we're going to focus on Miriam, who is very inspirational to me, a very fascinating woman. I'm going to try to see if I can share my screen. I don't know if I'll be able to do it successfully. So we're going to try it quickly. And if it doesn't work, then I'm just going to move on and not do it. But let me try. I'm really not great at this. Let me see if I can figure it out for a second. Share my screen. Okay, hold on. See, it's gonna let me share my screen. see how to do it, but I'm not seeing it. Oh, there we go. Okay, control share. Okay. Do we all see this family tree? Okay, perfect.
Yes.
At the moment, I believe everybody's muted. If anybody needs to unmute, then you can do that. I just want to make sure that nobody is being left out. I'm not super good at this. Okay, I think we're okay for now. All right. I'm going to do this for a minute, and I'm going to go back because it's actually a little bit confusing for me, but I want you to be able to see it. So who are we talking about today? We're diving into Miriam, one of our most influential women in our history. What I'm showing you here just quickly is to see the family tree where Miriam comes up in our Jewish story. So we have Jacob, Yaakov, who has a son, Levi, and then we have their children, Gershon, Kehath, Merari, and Yocheved. Yocheved marries Amram. So if you see, Yocheved marries Amram, and they become, Amram's from Kehath, and they become the parents to Miriam, Aharon, Aaron, and Moses, Moshe. So when we learn about Miriam, we are learning about the daughter of Yocheved and Amram. We're learning about the sister of Aaron and Moshe. And we're learning about Miriam as a woman in her own right. Moving down here, and then I'm going to probably unshare it because, again, it kind of confuses me. Okay. We're going to see these important dates on where in history are we talking about. So we have Miriam, who was born in the year 2362. You're going to see that she is born. When I look at this, what I see right away is that she's born a couple of years before Aharon, her brother, and before and a few more years before Moses, Moshe, her younger baby brother. Okay. And we see here when she passed away, when she died at 126 years old in the month of Nisan in the year 2487. Right now, I'm not going to focus on that, mainly just seeing where are we in the history. We know that we are in Egypt, and I'm going to dive into that in a minute. We are in Egypt. Miriam is going to be a very important part of our story. And we see that she's the older sister of Aharon and Moshe, as well as the daughter of Yocheved and Amram. I'm going to stop sharing. Like I said, it really confuses me, but hopefully that was helpful for anybody who is a visual learner. I know for me, it's tricky Zoom where you're just listening to someone talk, but this is the person that we're focusing in today. So we have the name Miriam. Another thing I should have done, maybe I'm going to write it quickly. Should have made a screen just with her name. 1 second. See if I can make a quick picture just with her name that you guys can all see clearly. We're going to focus on this woman, Miriam. So we see Miriam is this woman that's born, or this girl. Before she's a woman, first she's a girl, very powerful girl that is born in the times of Egypt when the Jews are there. I'm going to see quickly if I can make, hold on, and hold up a piece of paper. Miriam. So that we can see her name together. Because we are actually, okay, I don't know if this is it's in Hebrew, Mem, Resh, Yud, Mem. Not my best artwork, but Mem, Resh, Yud, Mem. And we're going to see, I'm going to hold this up a few different times, but what we're going to do is actually break down her life story and see how all of her life story is in her name. So we were talking about Jewish names. Her life story is inside of her name. And we have the name Miriam is going to have every combination of letters is going to give us a different sort of insight into her story. And why does this matter in general? And maybe you learned this when you learned about Sarah, is every time we learn about our history, and especially as Jewish women, when we learn about the Jewish women in our history, we're literally learning about what we're made of. This is our family, this is our DNA, and this is where we got our strength as a Jewish nation from. And this is where we have, like, I guess a lot of information, a lot of knowledge of what am I, who am I, where do I come from? So Miriam's going to give us a lot of that information. Okay, so number one, the first part of breaking down her name, I wish my drawing was a little better, but it is what it is going to be the word mar, which means bitter. You know the word maror that we eat on Pesach? We eat the bitter herbs. So that's the same root word here. So we're going to learn about bitter. Why would somebody name their child bitter? Okay, so obviously there's going to be more to it. But she was born in the most bitter times for the Jewish people. I mean, it really was the pits. We were in slavery for hundreds of years, we were not a free people. We were not as a nation together. The stories are pretty horrific. I feel like we learned the Disney version or the Prince of Egypt. We kind of learned the lighter versions as kids. But if you really would sit and read the explanations that is given in the Torah, the amount of murder and just really sick things that were going on. We learned that Paro was bathing in 300 babies' blood a day at some point. He would murder 300 babies just to be able to take their blood, bathe in it to help his skin. We learn about how they would take babies if the Jews did not finish their building of their quota. They would take babies and shove them into the Egyptians would take the babies and shove them into the buildings as bricks. We learn about specifically how they would give men women's work and women men's work. In other words, not only am I going to physically hurt you, I'm going to even mentally and emotionally kind of start breaking you down. You're going to do work that doesn't come natural to you. It doesn't feel fulfilling. Men would be out in the field for days. They would not know what was going on with their wives at home. Their wives would not know if their husbands were still alive. Really a very, very, very horrific time in history. And so I have some of the sentences, like I like to use sources as much as possible. So the first thing I'm going to read just quickly, some of the psukim that are straight from the Torah, some of the sentences straight from the Torah, to see what was going on. So it says, this is in Shemos, a new king rose over Egypt who did not know about Joseph. So now we have somebody who doesn't know the good parts of the Jewish people, or he doesn't know how Joseph was second to power. He said to his people, behold, the people of the children of Israel are more numerous and stronger than we are. Get ready, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they increase and a war befall us, and they join our enemies and wage war against us and depart from the land. I'm going to skip a little bit for time. So the Egyptians enslaved the children of Israel with back-breaking labor, and they embittered their lives with hard labor, with clay and with bricks and with all kinds of labor in the fields. All their work that they worked with them was back-breaking labor. And this is, again, I'm just reading the sentences from the Torah in English too, straight right now. The Da'as Kanim, which is a explanation on the Torah, says, when it says that they vayimaru, that they embittered the lives of the Jewish people, we learn that this was the time period that Miriam was born. Vayimaru, the word mem resh, bitter for Miriam, and that her name was commemorating that bitter time period in our Jewish lives. So the first thing we learn about Miriam is she was given a name that reflected what the Jewish people were going through at the time. It was very bitter. We're not going to leave it at that. Nobody should name their child bitter. While she was given that name, she was as well given the name, same root of mar, bitter, has Mary, mem, resh, yud. So if we look when I wrote this, so the mem and the resh, bitter, but now the mem and the resh, yud, together, Mary, actually means rebellion. She did not just sit in a bitter time of the Jewish life or our Jewish story and let it be. She rebelled against the bitterness. And from a very young age, we see that. So now I'm going to go into a couple of the sources where we see that she was not going to just take this lying down. So we see this as continuing in Shemos, the first chapter of Shemos, and it continues and it tells us, the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, one who was named Shifra, and the second who was named Pua. And an explanation by Shemos Rabbah on this tells us, who was Pua? Pua is Miriam. Why? Because Pua, from the same root word as Hophia, which means brazen, she was brazen against Paro. When they were in the king's chambers, when they were in his room, and he gave the instructions to Miriam and her mother Yocheved, that what are you going to do? He said, when you deliver the Hebrew women and you see on the birth stool, if it is a son, you shall put him to death. But if it is a daughter, she may live. We continue and it says, these are straight from the Torah. The midwives, however, feared God, so they did not do as the king of Egypt had spoken to them, but they enabled the boys to live. And we learn that the Torah tells us that it says, now it took place when the midwives feared God, that he made houses for them. He, with a capital H, that God made houses for them. In other words, Yocheved and Miriam were told, kill the baby boys. Don't let them live. They didn't listen. So obviously they would risk their lives. They were the midwives. And even Miriam as a young child, they did not listen to what Paro said. And we learned that God actually gave them a reward, that each Yocheved and Miriam had rewards of different houses of the Jewish people, different communities. It says that the Leviim and the Kohanim, the priests who served in the temple, they came from Yocheved, and the royal family, the kings, the future kings of the Jewish people, came from Miriam. That God rewarded them with this big honor of having the families, the leaders of Jewish people, be born from them because of what they did. But we're going to go back a little into the story, and we learn that when Paro told Yocheved and Miriam, Shifra and Pua, that was their nicknames, to do this to the babies, Miriam, who was a young child, called out. She screamed out. She was angry at Paro. And she said, woe to this man when God avenges him. Paro was obviously very angry. They're standing in the palace. He gave them an instruction, and she just basically cursed him out. And he wanted to have her killed right away. But Yocheved, her mother, said, come on, she's a kid. Will you pay attention to her? She's just a child. She doesn't realize who she's speaking or what she's saying. And she basically managed to quickly get Miriam out of the palace for saying something very, very disrespectful to the king, obviously, which came from a very true place in her, that she was just completely not okay with this direction that Paro was going to give to kill the babies, to kill Jewish children. But we see that she was brazen. She fought back, even from a young child's age, and she was not okay with this directive that Paro gave. Additionally, we're going to see where she kind of spoke up brazenly, kind of, sometimes we think being a loudmouth or being somebody who doesn't, who speaks without thinking might be a bad thing. But here we see that while it did get her into a little bit of trouble or a little hot water, it was actually what led Moshe to be born. So we're going to see now in the next chapter of the book of Shemos, in the story of Exodus, it says, a man of the house of Levi went and married a daughter of Levi. And we learn from this, that's very strange wording. Why are we hearing that they married in that way? Why not just this people got married? Why is it wording it that way? Is we're learning that Miriam's parents, Yocheved and Amram, who we saw in the family tree in the beginning, I can actually I printed it, so I don't know if you can see this quickly, but we're talking about Yocheved and Amram, who had gotten married, right? Miriam is the big sister, okay? We see that actually they had separated. They had actually divorced from each other or separated from each other because of Paro's decree. And they felt that if this is what the decree is, that we are going to have Jewish people, Jewish children be murdered, we can't continue to be married, and we need to just not be married so that we don't create more Jewish children. And we learn that Miriam screamed out or was brazen or whatever, you might use the word chutzpah. She had some chutzpah against her parents, and she said, your decree is harsher than Paro's. Whereas Paro issued a decree only against the males, you issued a decree against the females as well. Because now no babies will be born. So Paro was only going to kill one, but you are now not allowing any of the Jewish people to continue. And we understand that Yocheved and Amram were leaders. And when the Jewish people saw that that's what Yocheved and Amram did, they all the couples separated. So they were not having babies anymore. And the Jewish people were not procreating. And Miriam said, this is wrong. This is not the future of the Jewish people. And we see that Amram and Yocheved agreed when their daughter said that to them. They agreed with her. That shook them out. And they got remarried. And they therefore continued to have children. That's how we ended up with Moshe, the savior, right? The man who actually took us out. So we see that, again, her chutzpah came from a place of injustice. This is not okay. I'm not letting this happen. And from that, we talked about Mar, the bitterness, and Mary rebelling. She was rebelling against this acceptance of life is just terrible. And I feel like we're going to learn a lot more. I know we don't have so much time, but I feel like even just this point, and there's so much more that's coming up, but even just this point is already something so powerful that we can kind of think about. So many times things really do genuinely stink. They do. Stuff is tough, and it's a very bitter time, and maybe we can't find anything good in the moment. What she didn't, she's not saying the bad that I see is good. That's another level that we try to do. For me, that's not something that I can always access, right? There is that idea that even the difficult stuff comes from God and we can find the good in it. But let's say we're not there. All right. Stuff is just cruddy. It's difficult. And we're in a really bad time. She did not say, okay, I'm a victim to this horrible situation and I'm just stuck. She refused to be in that mentality. She refused to be stuck mentally and emotionally, and as much as she could practically, in the bad stuff. I think just that is already something we could really, really think about. But we're going to move on. Hold on to that for a little bit and move on. And we see the next thing about her name, or continuing in this rebelling against the bitterness. So we see that it says about Miriam a little bit later in Shemos, Miriam was a prophetess, and Miriam, the prophetess, the sister of Aaron, took a tambourine in her hand. We learned that later when the Jewish people left, which we'll get back to the story soon, that all the women had tambourines and we sang and we danced and we celebrated. But here, the Gemara, the Talmud, asks the question, why is she called the sister of Aaron and not the sister of Moshe in this verse? And the Talmud answers that when she was a little child, before she was the sister of Moshe, before Moshe was born, says, for she prophesied when she was the sister of Aaron. In other words, she wasn't just a prophetess as an adult woman, fully developed. Even when she was a child, since her youth, she was a prophetess, even before Moshe was born. And she would say, she was known to say, my mother is destined to bear a son who will deliver the Jewish people to salvation. And at the time when Moses was born, the entire house was filled with light, and her father stood and kissed her on the head and said to her, my daughter, your prophecy has been fulfilled. So we're seeing that she was not willing to sit in this bitterness. And it seems like that's a connection to her becoming a prophetess. And she was not ready to sit with this. And she prophesied from when she was little. She said, my mother will have the son Moshe. Interestingly, we see that her father kissed her on her head. Later, we're going to see that her father doubted her prophecy a little bit. Let's see if we can get to this. Okay. So again, that is breaking down this idea of rebelling against the bitterness, seeing that something out there is going to be better. I know good times are coming. I know my mother is destined to have this son. You need to get remarried because there is something good coming and we need to be ready for it. We need to be prepared for it, even if today really stinks. Even if the bitterness, I can't stop it all and I can't change it the moment, but it will change one day. And I want to be ready for it. Okay, continuing on. I feel like I'm on a race because I want to say so much and there's not that much time. Okay, so continuing on learning about Miriam, we're going to see what happened. The famous story, I think this is the most famous story everybody knows about Miriam, is when her brother Moshe was born, right? And we learned that he was born actually early. He was a preemie. And so his mother was able to keep him in the house because the Egyptian soldiers, they kind of tracked when babies were coming. And so they expected around 9 months, but he was born early. So they ended up with this buffer time that they were able to hide him in the house. And the Egyptian soldiers did not know that the baby was yet born. And so Yocheved, the mom, and she was able to raise Moshe for a few months in her house. And then it was time, and they saw that he was good. They saw that there was a shine coming from him. And then we see what happens, that now she can't hide him anymore because at this point, people are going to notice that there is a baby. At some point, they're going to notice. So this is when she puts him in the basket. And what does the Torah tells us? That his sister Miriam stood from afar to know what would be done to him. And it's interesting that the Torah points out here that it wasn't that she was standing there saying what will happen, but to know what will happen. A little bit of a nuanced difference, that she knew without a doubt he would be saved, because she knew without a doubt this boy would be the savior. He would be the person who helped the Jews. I don't like using the word savior, but that's he was going to be the one to take us out. He was going to be that person. So she wasn't standing there in doubt. She was standing there to see what's going to happen. How is this going down? How is the miracle happening? And we know that Paro's daughter came and saw the basket and stretched her arm and took the child, and he was crying. And she noticed, this is all again straight from the Torah in the book of Shemos. She had compassion on him, and she said, this is one of the children of the Hebrews. And we learn the backstory that she tried to get him fed, and he wouldn't take milk from anybody. He wouldn't drink, he wouldn't eat. So eventually Miriam, who had been hiding there, tells Paro's daughter, who has this baby, shall I go and call for you a wet nurse from the Hebrew women, from the Jewish women, so that he will nurse? And actually, Miriam called her mother Yocheved, and Yocheved was actually able to continue to feed her son as the wet nurse, right? So it was a secret identity going on, but she was able to actually continue to be with Moshe as the wet nurse. This is totally off topic, but very powerful idea of, even though Moshe was raised in King Paro's palace, which you would think would be the worst place ever to be raised, we learned that he came back as the strong, righteous person to take the Jewish people out, that he had very strong morals. We know that, again, this is a little bit off, so I'm not going to go into depth, but we know that as a child, he was reaching for the king's crown. This is the famous story of how he got a lisp. He was reaching for the king's crown, and they got nervous, like, maybe this is a Hebrew baby. Maybe this is a Jewish baby who's going to take my palace, my kingdom. So they did like a little the Egyptians in Paro's palace, his advisors did a little kind of test on this child, on this toddler. They put coals, hot, shining coals, and jewels in front of the baby to see the toddler, which one will he choose? And they said, coals are very shiny. So if he's just reaching for something because it's shiny, he'll reach for the coals. But if he's trying to take the palace, take the kingdom, he's going to reach for the crown. And the story goes that he actually was about to reach for the crown, because that's really what he was doing. And an angel pushed his hand. He grabbed the coals. They burned his fingers. He put the fingers in his mouth as a child, as a toddler, to cool his fingers down. And he actually burnt his tongue, which is where Moshe actually got his lisp from and his speech impediment from. Why am I bringing this up now? Is we see that Moshe was raised in like not a great place, not in a great position, in like an evil palace where people hated the Jewish people. And yet he had this strong moral compass through and through. And this is not a class about Moshe, so I'm going to skip through it. But basically, we see the strength of his mother, the Jewish mother, even though she had such a small amount of time with him, that in her feeding him and in her raising him in his early years, just we learn about 2 years while he was a nursing child, who had the impact for the rest of his life. So again, we see the strength of a Jewish woman and Yocheved, of how she was able to affect her son. Anyway, continuing on, we see that actually Miriam's father doubted the prophecy. When Miriam was watching her brother in the water, the Gemara, the Talmud tells us, the father tapped her on the head and saying, "My daughter Miriam, where is your prophecy now?" In other words, this isn't looking very good. We just put our baby in a basket in the water. This prophecy of he's going to come and save the Jewish people, where is this now? And the Talmud is clear that Miriam was watching what would be done to him to know, how is this prophecy going to end? In other words, she did not doubt it. Okay. Gosh, there's so much. I have to like think of where I'm skipping. I want to skip. Okay.
Can I interrupt you?
Of course.
Are you saying that at that young age, that baby was connected to God in other words, God was going to protect that baby no matter what. And Miriam was aware of that.
Correct.
Wow.
Yes.
I can't believe that. That's so amazing.
Very, very
Amazing.
powerful. Yeah, correct. That's exactly what we're saying. Okay, now I'm going to jump into another aspect of Miriam. So we see how she spoke up against the king. She spoke up to her parents. She wasn't willing to just sit here and wait. We see that she was watching what is happening to Moshe, not to wonder, but to see how is this prophecy going to come true. Later on, when she is more of an adult woman, we see a few things about her. And one of the things that I find so powerful is that she encouraged the Jewish women to continue to have children, to continue to sleep with their husbands, to make Jewish babies, and to procreate and build the Jewish nation, even while life was so dark. And there's many stories about this, but where it comes out, the most powerful thing, or many like areas that we learn about this, is that where it comes out is that we learn that she encouraged the women, don't get stuck in the depression. And we see that she encouraged the women, that it seems to be that the women were the ones who had this ability to rise above the depressing, sad state of life. And they went out to the fields where their husbands were. And the pasuk, the sentence from the Torah tells us that they would go and they would prepare food for their husbands. They would go to the field and they would wash their husbands and feed them. And then they would show them mirrors, almost like the original selfie. They would hold mirrors, little mirrors up, and they would look in the mirror together with their husbands. So their faces together, look in the mirror and show them, we're beautiful. We're together. We're strong and we're beautiful. And they would arouse their husband's desire to actually sleep with them. And this is done in such a beautiful and such a respectful way of coming together and remembering we are a couple, we are a family, and we can't let the depressing hard work take over. And from this, they would continue to have children and kept the Jewish people alive. Now, where do we hear about this? To me, that's the most powerful. It's skipping ahead in the Torah. Later, when we learn about Moshe building the Mishkan, the tabernacle. And we learn about all of the different things that he created, or that they built, the different vessels and the different kalim vessels, the different things that they used to serve in the Mishkan. The Mishkan, right, was the moving temple. And it says, the pasuk says in Shemos, but many chapters later, and he made the washstand of copper and its base of copper from the mirrors of the women who had set up the legions, who congregated at the entrance of the tent of the meeting. In other words, the entrance to daily service, where the priests, where the Kohanim would wash their hands and prepare to serve every day in the holiest place that we have on this earth, in the temple, in the Mishkan, and then again in the temple, was built out of the mirrors that the women used to continue to make their husbands feel positive, feel connected, feel loved, sleep with them, and therefore also build the Jewish morale and the Jewish families. Those mirrors were so powerful. And we learn in Gemara, the Talmud actually tells us a whole back and forth story, that Moshe himself wasn't sure if he should use these mirrors. Like, is this holy? I'm unsure. In other words, Moshe, the leader of the people, was unsure. I understand that these women are bringing these, they ran to donate their mirrors, and he's not sure. Is this something that's lustful? Is this something that's very, what is it? And he wasn't sure. And the Talmud relates the conversation between Moshe and God, where God says the words in Hebrew. These are my favorite words probably in the Torah. Ki elu chavivim elai el hakol, which means these are the most precious to me. God explains to Moshe, this union of husband and wife, that the woman brought it, that she was able to stay above the depression that they were able to then be together, this is the most precious thing. And therefore, the vessel that we wash our hands, that we prepare for service every day, was made out of these mirrors, which was specifically discussed between Hashem and Moshe. This is the most important thing. This is so precious. This is so special. And again, this is something that Miriam encouraged the women to do. She rebelled against this victim depressing mentality. You're not going to get stuck in this. We are not going to let this be the only story we live in. No, I, Miriam, can't save the Jewish people, or I have no idea how to break out of Egypt. They were stuck. The stuckness in Egypt was very strong. But yet, even in that, we don't have to be victim to every single part of this negative space. We can keep a big part of ourselves. I never watched this movie, but I remember the line from Braveheart. I never watched it, but I just remember this: "You can take my land, but you can never take my freedom." I remember when I was a child that it was like it would repeat on the TV. This was like the part of their, I don't know, the trailer for the movie. So this idea that you might have us enslaved, but you can't take us, not us. You can't get who we are. And Miriam encouraged the Jewish women to do this. And we see this later again about how she rebelled against this story, when later, again, kind of jumping around, mainly because I don't have that much time, but also to show you who she was. And we learned that when the Jewish people left Egypt, when we finally did leave, it says in the Torah, and Miriam, the prophetess, Aaron's sister, which we already understood why she was called Aaron's sister there, took a tambourine in her hand, and all the women came out after her with tambourines and with dances. And Miriam called out to them, "Sing to the Lord, Shiru la Hashem, ki ga'a sus urachova rava vayom." Sing to God, for very exalted is he, a horse and its rider he cast into the sea. This is the famous song that the Jewish women sang when we left Egypt. And the big question is, sorry?
Isn't that when Moshe split the sea and they went safely to the other side?
Yes, and they went singing with tambourines.
The men sang as Yashir.
Yes. So it says about the men that they sang. Everybody sang. But it only says about the women that we had the tambourines. And it doesn't just say some women or just Miriam, but that all the women had the tambourines. And actually, there's a lot of discussion. Does this really mean all? And the discussions on the Torah say, yes, it does. It really means all. All the women had these tambourines. Well, think about that for a second. In order to have a tambourine, you need to have created it at some point. You need to we learn about how the Jews ran out of Egypt, and we have matzah because the dough didn't have time to rise, right? Like we know there wasn't that much time. They had to get their kids and their families and whatever belongings they were able to take. Where did they have these tambourines from? Where did this come from? We didn't have time to suddenly create musical instruments. And this is something that I think this is, the Rebbe brings this out and quotes from all different sources to bring out that, yes, all the women had tambourines, every single one. How? How did they do that? Rashi explains the women of the generation had such faith in God. Even while in this miserable servitude of Egypt, they actively awaited redemption, each woman preparing a tambourine to take with her when the redemption finally arrived. That we were ready. We knew that we don't know when it's coming, but we believe it is coming. And let me see if I can show you quickly. I'm going to walk you through my office, but we actually keep the custom with Chabad women is that we keep tambourines by our doors. So you can see, you're going to also see my husband's hat. But here we have a door, and we keep our music instruments by the door. That's our tambourine ready to go. So that we believe in perfect faith that even though things look pretty dark, when Mashiach will come, we will be ready. And we will be ready to sing and dance, just like Miriam has taught us, or taught us then, that she got all the women. She recognized this. Where can we keep the Jewish people strong? Through the women. That is where we're going to keep the Jewish people's strength from. We're making sure that even though things really, really were bitter, we're not going to get stuck in the bitterness. And again, we see how she rebelled against the bitterness. Okay, there's so much more we need to learn, but we don't have that much time. So another really beautiful thing about Miriam's name is, though, if we look at it again, the mem, resh, mem. So this time skipping the yud, right? We did mar, bitter. We did Mary, rebelling. Now the mem, resh, mem actually means to raise up. And we see that Miriam single-handedly raised up the morale of the entire Jewish people. How? Through the women. So she, this one very, very wise woman, raised up the women, and the women were then able to raise up their families, their homes, the men, their children, etc. That we were able to then be a people ready to leave Egypt and to go with joy and with singing and with dancing. The other thing that we learned about her name, I love this because I feel like now, whenever you see the name Miriam, hopefully your brains will, you may not remember everything we talked about, but you'll see in her name the bitterness that she rebelled against, that she raised people up. And the last thing we see in her name is there was a reward the Jewish nation got because of her, which is the mem, yud, mem. So this time holding out the resh, mem, yud, mem, the water. We got the water in the desert. We got the Be'er Miriam, the well of Miriam was something that we got in her honor. And it's interesting when the whole story that you learned about, I'm sure, of Moses hitting the rock, very interesting, but that happened after she passed away. In other words, until that time, while Miriam was alive, there was a well of water that would follow the Jewish people. We actually learned that most explanations explain that there was like this big rock, and the rock would travel with us. Obviously, completely a miraculous situation. The rock would travel with us, and every time the Jews settled, the rock would settle, and from it would burst forth a bunch of streams. And we use that water for everything we need, to drink, to bathe, to use the mikvah, for women to be able to use the mikvah and be able to continue, again, building the Jewish family, community. And we got all of this, and we know how important water is to life, and it all came from this power of Miriam, from her. It was her honor. And it's interesting, something that I learned that I actually never learned before. This is maybe shouldn't be what I end off with, but was very interesting, is that as much as we talk about the Jewish, leaders as tzaddikim, righteous people, and they are, we also learn from them as that they're not just intangible, high up there, and I can't understand anything about them. We also learn about their human character traits. And we see that Miriam wasn't perfect. Moshe wasn't perfect. They were probably significantly more perfect than us. But they also will learn about things that, choices that they made or whatever. And we see something really interesting. While Moshe was the greatest leader of all times, this moment where he hits the rock, which even that, they have a whole beautiful explanation about why he did that, specifically to stand with the Jewish people and to make them not look bad. I'm not going to get into that now unless you want to stick around. It's really powerful. But we see that this moment of sort of maybe even having a question on how to lead the Jews happened after Miriam passed away. And this, when I learned this from another teacher, and she said, this is her just sort of putting pieces together. This part, I'm not quoting to you as a Torah source, but as a concept, where we see the strength that Miriam was, this like backbone, this strength behind the Jewish people the whole time, behind her parents, behind her brother being born, behind the women, behind the families. And that when she passed away, it seemed like there was a moment of faltering, of challenge. The Jewish people got a little fussy. Maybe there was a question. It just seems like there was maybe a moment of like that backbone passed away, and now we had to rebuild ourselves without it, which was tough. But that was a really interesting idea that this teacher that I learned from brought this up. I thought that was really fascinating. But we see that she had this honor, that we got the well of the water in her merit. And it says that when Miriam died, the well disappeared. And that we learned that later in the Parsha, in the Torah. And then it says, and there was no water for the congregation. And that is when this whole discussion came forth of what should Moshe do? Until that point, every time they would settle, the rock would give water. But now all of a sudden it didn't. And we do learn that if Moshe would have just asked the rock, then it would have given water. And I have to throw in this little bit of Placidus, this little idea that Moshe realized. We always learn like this was a big mistake, but we learned another thing, that Moshe realized something. The Jewish people were complaining. God had just taken us out of Egypt. God was doing miracle after miracle after miracle, very open, crazy, very clear miracles. And yet we kept complaining. We kept faltering, right? Like we would be strong and then we would struggle. We'd be strong, we would struggle. We were very human. I'm not blaming us. It was tough life, but it was an interesting thing where we would be strong, but then we would like get frustrated quickly. And in just talking to the Jews, it didn't seem to do enough for them. We're complaining about being thirsty. We're complaining about being hungry. We complain that we didn't have meat. We complain about different things. And so Moshe realized if he just talks to the rock and the rock gives water, the Jewish people are going to look pretty bad because it's a rock, right? It's an inanimate object that God hasn't been doing miracles for. And yet for the Jewish people who God has literally been carrying with miracle after miracle after miracle, just speaking to them wasn't enough. So Moshe, as a true leader of the Jewish people, stood alongside his people and made sure they didn't look bad to God, made sure that he stood along their side. I forget the English word, whatever, he aligned himself with the people and made sure that they wouldn't come out in a negative light at this time. Anyways, so I'm wrapping it up and then we'll unmute and open to whatever discussion you want to have. I know it's late, trying to keep the time. We have this amazing, powerful woman, Miriam. When I see somebody who is frustrated with injustice, I think of Miriam. Miriam was raised in a really tough time. She rebelled against it. She raised us up. She brought us blessings. And she really, really harnessed the power of Jewish women. Recognized that the key to the Jewish people was through the Jewish woman. And I think about this every single Friday night when we sing the Eshes Chayil. You don't have to sing the Eshes Chayil if you're married, if you are, I don't know, only in this or that circumstance. Eshes Chayil is sung by everyone. If you make your own Kiddush, you sing it. The Eshes Chayil honors the Jewish woman that we sing every single Friday night because there is this understanding that the Jewish woman is the rock, is the cornerstone, and that we have the ability to bring up the Jewish people, bring up our mindset, our emotions, our mentality of not being stuck in a negative, depressing space or a difficult space, and that we have that strength that we can tap into even today. And we learn that the women of today are directly connected, that we are the reincarnations of those women. So when we're going through tough stuff, we already have the power inside of our souls and inside of our bodies to be able to not become victims inside, even if the outside is really, really, really negative. We learned that from Miriam. I'm going to end the class because I don't want to take up your whole day. I'm trying to keep the time. I hope you learned something new. My favorite part is about the intimacy, where God basically declares that this intimacy that the women and the men had, this was the most valuable thing. This is beautiful. This is in no way negative. In no way is it considered like tarnished. It is so powerful, so beautiful that it's literally used as the entrance to the tabernacle. Okay. I would invite you to unmute, ask any questions, share any thoughts. If you learned something new, let us know. Something you want to argue about,